And I
Well,
have to say, you look resplendent.
Yeah, well, I've just come off a trawler, as you can see. Just been out catching some mackerel and releasing them, obviously.
It might be the quality of your computer camera, but you look unusually healthy.
I don't feel unusually healthy.
No.
You look very hale and hearty, actually.
It's lightning.
Filters on.
Lighting.
I thought you had the filters on like Bruno Tonioli. I mean, he has all the filters, doesn't he?
Who's Bruno Tonioli? Does he play for Sunderland?
If only.
You set your computer. You look good. You look like a silver fox. Yeah. Piercing blue eyes like my bird.
Very much like a stuffed bird. Yeah.
If radio was visible, you would be threatening Ian McMillan's job, but it's not. So.
No.
You're in trouble.
I don't think we'll see visible radio in our lifetime, will we? It's just not.
So I found out now that you talk like your poems, Tom.
I'm always on, always working. You know.
Yeah. It's just that is the pain, isn't it? It's the agony.
Yeah, it is. Can't turn it off, can you? Can't turn
I'm with you. Pagliacci, the agony of the clown.
Yeah, absolutely. Shoes.
The squeaky shoes.
The big squeaky shoes. So should we try? What I was thinking is that it'd be nice to have quite a short film, but we can talk for longer.
Okay.
Talk, and I'll see what we get.
Yeah.
Or maybe sort of try and get about 5 minutes. You know, it'd be quite nice.
Of talking, yeah. We could talk for as long as you want. I thought we could talk for ages. Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, let's just chat for ages. I think you should leave all of this in. I think people are fascinated about us. I think they're just...
Well, who wouldn't be? Who wouldn't be?
I think we should have a wide...
I have got all your works behind me here, as you can see. I've got this all... There's all the editions you've got, all the ones translated, all the different languages.
Yeah, it's true.
The softback, the edible ones that have been seized by the authorities.
Yeah, you did produce once a tea bag of one of my poems.
I did, yeah.
So
I did.
Most of the edible versions have been produced by Zimzala.
Yes, that's very much. I'm very much an edible press.
No, I think we should have a wide-ranging conversation because people seem to watch things like that, and why not? I think this is the first time we've ever Zoomed.
I think it is.
So I think it's up to you. I'll follow your lead. You're the master of Zimzala, but I'm happy to just have a big chat.
Okay, so we should say, when are we talking? We're talking on November what's the date?
9th.
So we're in lockdown.
Yeah.
We've known each other a long time, but we've always been quite socially distanced, really, haven't we? I mean, we sort of invented that, I think, in a way.
Yeah, I believe that's true.
We've never been within 2 meters of each other, I don't think. Certainly not intentionally. We've been space for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that's you fleeing me. You know, it's one of my hobbies for me to try and be as affectionate to you and sincere as possible, because I know that repulses you. So
it's a northern thing, you know. It's a bit more space. You know, it's right with you, Latin temperament.
Yeah. And normally I'm also cold like you, but when I'm around you, I just feel like I need to be more jubilant and agreeable and friendly and express my admiration for you. We've known each other for 10 years and 11 years because you published my first ever poem.
Yes,
so
in
that is a true
Parameter
story.
magazine, which was the predecessor to Zimzala, which was a magazine, just a magazine. It wasn't anything else, wasn't books or anything like that. But yeah, I remember getting those poems and thinking these are some of the worst things I've ever seen. I thought, as I've said to you before, when you get a lot of submissions, there are most of them where you think no, there are some where you think maybe, and there's a tiny percentage where you think yes, and that was yours straight away.
Oh, thanks.
And I think I published everything you sent on that occasion, the first batch you sent, and it was very nice for me to get them because let's be honest, when you're running a magazine open to the general public, you know, it's not a lot of fun submissions, and you're saying no to people a lot of the time. Either that's because you just, you know, largely because they've sort of sent you something that hasn't fitted with the they haven't researched the magazine, you know, and they've got no idea what the ethos is. So you do spend a lot of time sending rejection emails. So it's always nice, as when I encountered your work for the first time, to get something that you think is really great and be able to say yes, you know. So
it was very important for me because I remember it was paper submissions, so I had to print out my poems and put them in the mail. And I was working at the British Museum as a guard, and so it was a print magazine. So I mean, I've reflected on this a few times. I can remember it from Parameter, from Poetry Salzburg Review. I don't know, I think that's still running. I remember actually giving it to friends, like sharing it on the galleries of the British Museum, and like palpably excited, like tingly feeling of excitement. It sounds brutal to say, but I've talked about it a lot because I wonder for myself, does the line keep moving? You know, am I still excited by the presence of a new book or of a publication? And to a certain extent, you know, you can't go back, you know, because that feeling, like, it is innocent without being ridiculous and sincere. I was so sure that there was some sort of vision of the future in that. And it isn't, is it? It's just like a magazine comes through the door and then you put it in your shelf or you put it in a box and then you just move on to the next one. Not to be negative, but because it was the first, it was really important to me. And it was also because of the nature of the work that you were publishing and your own work, which was really influential to me in that period for me in 2009, 2010, when I first discovered poetry. It was breaking into a whole universe of understanding what things might be. So it's quite weird. It's quite weird to think of it, really.
Yeah, I remember the first time when I tried to get magazines for a long time. And I think I managed, the first time I got into one was mid-90s, and it was Stand. And then that I got into London Magazine. I remember getting those and thinking, well, that's me sorted then.
Yeah.
That's it. That's my life sorted. You know, but it doesn't really work like that. And I think if you can accept that and still keep doing it for its own sake, then you can always feel you're doing it for the right reasons, because there are always easier things to do, I think.
Definitely.
And so talking just to sort of link to what we're here to talk about, which is the
new disappointment.
The second edition of Dyslexic Scribbling and Scrawling of S.J. Fowler. So we did the first edition in 2018, I think it was.
Yeah, summer of 2018, yeah.
So you talked about the initial excitement of being published and how that is difficult to replicate. Do you think that's something to do with, maybe restlessness is the wrong word, but you're more than perhaps any other writer I know, you're somebody that does so many different things, so many different forms. Do you think part of that, in this case, looking at asemic writing, is a bid to recapture that sort of excitement, that sort of thrill, newness?
What I think is, I was going to say before, I had a series of moments like my first publication, my first book, my first, whatever commission, and I had a couple that were depressing. That actually I thought I'd broken through into a different place, and perhaps it's like a problem of the mind. You always perceive yourself as not doing something that you should be doing. Definitely, there's a few things I've done, like, I don't know, reading at Hey on Y in Mexico, which I'm pretty sure I'm the only experimental poet writing weird poems who've ever done that, and yet no one notices. And I'd go to like British readings and they'd introduce me as the organizer of the Enemies Project and then stop talking, so I definitely felt that this was a problem I'd have to confront, and I'd be really interested to hear your opinion on it, because you've been writing and publishing for 25 years and done a lot of books just like me, and you were around 15 years before I came into the scene. But I think this is really the one question, actually. Can you keep going from an internal motivation? And the way I rationalize this is to try and find a non-theoretical, purposeful reasoning for the things that I'm doing. So I'm not doing them for a sake of, money or for habit or because I'm compelled for some other reason, to actually choose each one. And so with things like organizing events, it's to create friendships because otherwise I'm not very social, and it's to meet new people and to collaborate. With things like asemic writing, the reason why it became so important to me, and it's all led up to this book which kind of consolidates all of that stuff together, is because I suppose I was trying to retrospectively find reasoning connected to some experimental poetry methodologies which felt to me valid, that it could be pressure tested by describing it, say, to my family or my friends from work or martial arts who don't care about poetry. And that then is also because of teaching, right? If you want to teach scribbling to 20-year-olds, or you want to publish a book of scribbles, I feel like you're going to feel like it's indulgent. It's probably not going to get the biggest reception in the world. You're probably not going to be able to be motivated by external forces. So the internal reasoning is key to me. And for each one of the things I've done, collaboration, sound poetry, whatever, I've found this reason, whether it's through neurobiology, whether it's through human behaviors. With sound poetry, I speak to my students about baby noises and how parents speak to their children. I talk about speaking to yourself on the bus. I talk about the noises you make as you fall over or get dug in the ribs. You know, it's that stuff which is the reason why I'm doing it, because it seems to me a cathartic, valid, therapeutic practice. And with asemic writing, it's similar. It seems to me that doodling, the act of writing without semantic intention, is actually fundamental to a lot of human culture, certainly writing culture. The down regulating of the brain, you know, I talked about this in the book, the idea that writing therapy doesn't work if you're typing, that you have to have that physical contact and that sense of expressive movement. So I suppose that's to tie those things together. When I have had these semi-catastrophic moments of like, you know what, I'm packing this in, I'm not going to do this anymore because no one cares about what I'm doing. The community of people around me I've been lucky enough to find has helped it, but it's also these reasons. And asemic writing at the moment in my life is the most energized. When I share it with people, when I do little lectures online, when I do events, when I do publications, people are really keyed into it. I think they feel it in a very kind of essential way. So, I mean, I'm interested in you then in that regard. Like, have you had moments where you thought, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore?
I've had moments where I thought I'm not going to bother sending stuff anywhere. I don't think I've ever had moments where I thought, I suppose, yeah, I mean, I think this sort of thinking about things isn't quite so important to me as it is to you. I've always just found myself doing it, and I cannot stop doing it. It's the only thing that's ever stopped me doing writing was doing an MA in creative writing.
Right.
For a while. That stopped me in my tracks for a while because I got too self-conscious about it.
Right.
You know, if I'm still doing it now at my age, on top of family, on top of work, then I'm always going to be doing it. You know,
yeah,
I'm always going to be doing it. Just
do you have any sense of why you do it?
Well, I think it's sort of like it's more how I feel like if I don't do it, there's always this sort of sense that something is not quite right. There's always sort of something missing.
Wow.
That I'm not quite, nothing major, but they'll sort of be like, you know, sometimes I'll sort of be a bit irritable or whatever. And I'll think, what's that about? And I think, oh, it's because I haven't written for 6 days, you know?
Shit.
So it is sort of like, it's almost like I've stopped thinking about why I'm doing it and what I'm doing. It's almost like I'm always going to be doing it, and I've got to find ways to do it. It's a sort of what the far less erudite explanation I've arrived at for myself.
It's amazing because I don't have that at all.
The compulsion.
Yeah, I don't at all. I enjoy it. I don't have that compulsion at all, which might seem ironic because you kindly mentioned I do publish a lot, but or I do write a lot, but I don't. Yeah, maybe I'm just ignorant of myself, and I do have that because I obviously do it a lot. But for me, I have sometimes months and months where I'm not writing. at all, and then I have big bursts. And so that fascinates me. I am really obsessed with the why. I think if I didn't control the why of what I'm doing with everything, I would find myself thinking, why am I doing this? Does it make you feel at all motivated or gratified that people who are writing now have been influenced by you, or feel like that your work with Zimzala and your work with a very specific kind of conceptual poetry and also kind of literary experimental poetry has had, you know, an effect? My writing wouldn't be what it is without discovering yours. You know, the admiration I've had for your work for a very long time, and a lot of people feel the same. Do you even think about that, or do you not even?
It's also, I mean, I just sort of think I'm very much like you are. I think I'm very much community orientated, I think, and I've had a lot of help from people. People have been kind to me, you know, and they've even if it's just talking to me when there's no reason to be talked to, you know. I think for example, like Robert Shepherd, who I did my PhD with at Edge Hill, I knew Robert before I'd even really done very much writing, and now I've done quite a bit of writing. I can honestly say he's been the same with me throughout. And there are other people like that. And I've seen Robert with lots of other people. He's the same with an 18-year-old student as he is with a 65-year-old famous poet. And I've encountered quite a few people like that have just been, not even supportive is the wrong word, just treated me as an equal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think, I'm very keen to pass that on. And so whenever younger people or people who are sort of newer writing than I am ask me things or want to talk to me about publishing or talk to me about writing, I will always do it, as I know you do too, because that's very important to me. So I just really see as pitching in to create the same thing, really, that people have done that with me, so I do it. It's not even to get any reward, just because that's what you should do, you know.
Yeah,
there's a code.
Yeah, and I got that from you and from a lot of the people who supported me early on. Well, a lot of our mutual friends, and Robert too, and you know, Scott Thurston, and a lot of these.
Yeah, Scott too.
Chris McCabe, a lot of these people helped me early on, and I think that's right. It's exactly as I see it. It's a karmic wheel. That's what I always say. It is a big fat karmic wheel, because I had the exact same incredible support and generosity, and Robert's a brilliant example because he continues to do that for a lot of people around him now.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
and I think his place in British poetry is significant for people who understand the more kind of complex side of it, but also I do think he's overlooked. Like, I think you're a little bit overlooked, you know. I hope that isn't rude to say, but I do think that there should be a wider appreciation of the years of work that's gone in. So I've always felt that's an interesting thing. It's one of the motivations why I put on events, to put on people who I think are doing really exciting work and who aren't necessarily the most visible for some reason. Yeah,
so thinking about your events, I mean, they almost seem, it's sort of, it understates the important thing to describe you as an organizer, because it seems to me that is as much part of your creative practice as your actual creative practice. Certainly I've seen you when you put people together, like when you put me and Chris McCabe together, there's a reason for us to go together, but yet that pairing has been such a transformative thing for me, and I hope Chris has enjoyed it too.
But I doubt it, but yeah.
Well, you know, actually I hope he hasn't. But that was sort of an inspired thing, which was obviously to do with thinking about how different writers could go together. And I've seen that happen with so many other pairings that you've done. You know, quite often I'll get emails from people who will say, you know, I met you at the Enemies Project, I was doing this and I was doing that, and I was with this person, quite often somebody that I might have published, and it all connects together. But it almost seems to be that that's not just random, that is something, that's a skill, and that's almost like a creative skill.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I can think of a few people like Kim Campanello, who you published recently, and Leon Sloupet, or Phil Terry and James Davies, you know, pairs like that over the years, which is just very fruitful.
Yeah, Leon's just bought a mother baby home, actually. He's just,
no.
Yeah, but it's just come, I've probably got it here. It's been all the way to Argentina and come back because Argentine customs wouldn't believe something so big could be a book.
You're kidding me. That must have cost a bomb.
It didn't cost that much to send, actually. It's cheaper than sending. It's actually cheaper than sending it to somewhere in this country.
Jesus.
Been all the way to Argentina and come back. Leonce and I are trying to work out how to get it to him at the moment. I don't know. Maybe
amazing
by page.
Yeah, I think it would suit his poetry to do that. He's an amazing human being. Yeah, he looked after me. He's a good example of what I was going to say about the Pez. When I went to Argentina, he looked after me. I was scared because I hadn't been to Argentina before and I didn't quite know what I was doing. The hospitality that he showed me, it was unbelievable. And he's German and he speaks like the best Argentinian Spanish in the world. I think I see it in the same terms that you were suggesting. Part of your behavior of supporting other people and influencing people like me has been because you received that. In a sense, it was like it's something that happens in a side of British poetry that I'm very proud of. That I think what I've tried to do with making my events international is to bring people to the UK to kind of see that in a way. And I've written about The Other Room, you know, the reading series you organized for a decade with Scott Thurston and James Davies about that. Like an affability and unpretentious engagement with just like decent behavior. Because when I started Enemies, there was a lot of, I was just in the process of quitting my PhD and I was figuring out how much theory to me is constipatory and negative and actually something kind of used as an armor or a shield by people for a variety of reasons. And a lot of people were trying to theorize the Enemies Project about, you know, whatever, the dual identity of people reading collaborative, and I'm just not interested. It's about, like, I met Chris and he's down to earth. He's got a good sense of humor and he has a certain way of writing. I met you have the same qualities. And I just thought those two would get on. And so when I've talked about this and I've been invited to speak about it in other countries more than England, actually, I've talked about it quite a few times in Germany and Poland where we went and stuff. And I always just say it's like a Venn diagram of like a talented person who's a decent person, and you just pop them together on a feeling. So in a way that is right. That is the theory behind it. It's just not to be theoretical and get a sense of people. And perhaps because of the jobs I did before poetry, I'm quite sensitive to people, I suppose. And I really am careful in choosing who I work with. And, I've been lucky because I do think we've done over 300 Camarada events. So you're talking about 1,000 poets. I mean, really 1,000 around the world. I've had 5-10, which have been bad pairs. So you're talking about hundreds of examples of people getting on. And I think part of it too is poets are desperate to do things like that. They're really keen to like be out making work. It's something that is deprived of traditional modes of poetry, which is like the joy of musicians have, theatre makers have, a lot of visual artists have, which is the collaborative. It's just innate to them. But for poets, when I say to them, will you do this, often for now? I mean, Robert Shepherd and Ian McMillan, two people we've mentioned. I mean, that's
a great one, wasn't it?
It's a brilliant one. You just put people together. And then I think the second thing is that I don't tell anyone what to do, right? I just say,
you've got your time.
Yeah. And I think people appreciate that.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's something unique that you bring, the emphasis on. I think you've certainly massively raised the profile of, well, not even just raised the profile, introduced the idea of collaboration to a lot of people. Because, as you say, writing is often, or at least perceived to be, a solitary pursuit, isn't it? You know, it's something that you do, and then you may read it on your own in front of an audience that ultimately end up in a book with your name alone on the front. So I think this more sort of plural idea, maybe taking things from other scenes, other art forms where that sort of plurality is more widespread. It's been a revolutionary thing, really, for poetry as we, the poetry that we're interested in, certainly,
Well, that's very generous. I think the thing is, it's just like we were saying before, I see it as selfish, like, and I don't mean that faux modest at all in any way whatsoever, because the key question is, why am I still organizing collaborative readings 10 years later? Why have I done 300? And why, as soon as the lockdown ends, will I do another 20 next year and another one and another one? I've spent a lot of time thinking, am I compelled to do it? Am I doing it for some reason internally? And no, because as we were discussing recently. We've been in lockdown. We haven't done anything since March, and I don't miss it at all. But I do it because I don't drink and I don't socialize in an English way. So it's really social for me. I get to be in an environment that's creative. Without sounding like a megalomaniac control freak, I also kind of choose who the people are. Yeah. So that's an incredible privilege because I get to ask people who I admire and I get to watch them create brand new things, not their greatest hits, not the wrinkly paper coming out of the pocket and like, this is my poem, the Blackbird. I actually get the feeling that they're making something new. And I got to watch it, and people are so generous to me and kind. And then sometimes when I can get funding, I also can make a living. So to me, it's entirely selfish because it's really built some of the most important friendships of the last decade of my life and seen me go into places all over the world that when I was young in like rural Devon, feeling like the whole world was beyond me, or when I was doing martial arts and I thought I'm just going to get my head kicked in, it's just unbelievable. So I think that's the thing where I feel like I'm glad other people benefit from it, but that's like an accident. It's an accident.
Yeah. So thinking about all the places that you've been, all the different cultures that you've been exposed to and taken from and given to, do you ever think about identity? Do you ever think of yourself, are you still a British writer, would you say? Or do you feel very much out of sync with what we are in this country, and do you maybe identify more with Europe or with South America? Just interesting, because I think I'm irretrievably British,
Yeah.
I'm interested in all sorts of everywhere else, American poetry in particular, but it'll always come out sounding, this sort of, I don't even know what it is, but I think it always ends up sounding British. Whereas I think, you've got a sort of more cosmopolitan element. So I wondered what sort of, is there a tradition? Is there a area of practice that you identify with more than others?
I think I feel very, very British. I think that's why 2010 I interviewed you. So this is the return.
Yeah.
In 2020, and I said there's this unspoken quintessential poetic material which is one of the best things about British culture, which is I don't have a phrase for it, the anti-tragedy, the everyday, the Alan Partridge touches on it, Chris Morris touches on it, but it's not poetry there. And I've been attracted to that because I found it in your work, and it was like a permissive moment finding it in your work. That's why I do talk about your work a lot. I teach your work because that is very complex, pure tonality, vocabulary, construction. It's contextually very, very agile, and yet it comes off to people like, oh, that's funny. But if they're not watching like the machinery of it, if they're not studying the ennui, in every ASDA, in every B&Q, in every in every one of these like incredibly British spaces, there is this poetry in our language, which I think you've captured more than anyone, really more than anyone at all, and that's why I teach it. I don't
it's
know.
Sort of a poetics of bits and bobs, isn't it? It's what I think about. Bits and bobs, a very British phrase. It's all the sort of stuff that you would never think of. I'm interested in all these sort of unregarded things: quiche, crisps, vegan sausage rolls,
razzle,
very much so. Skips, bins, all these sort of things, which I think is something that you would never find in what you would call mainstream poetry.
For sure.
That stuff is just very much all fenced off. And the writers that I like yourself, like Jeff Hilson, for example.
I was going to say Jeff, yeah.
And Holly, that do all these sort of things that sort of bring in all the sort of weird little bits of language and the weird little scraps of this and that and make something out of it. That's very much what I'm interested in doing myself. The poetics of the reduced counter, the yellows.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think you've got more to your practice than that, because you have all these different aspects. You've not least the book that we're talking about here. And
I feel very British, though. I would say. I was going to say, yeah, exactly. Jeff Hilson's a great example. When I first saw Jeff read, what he's doing with syntax and what he's doing with rhythm and what he's doing with vocabulary is incredibly sophisticated, precisely because it's not trying to protect itself with a language of poetry, the poetry language, which feels to me like, I think almost everything, and it relates to my book, is about in British poetry or in a lot of poetry, because British poetry is not the worst of it. I mean, British poetry, that's one of the advantages of traveling, is that I'm grateful for a huge amount of what happens in this country. And that the binary of like experimental not is very, very silly, and it doesn't really exist, and it kind of does. And especially recently, it's been completely messed up. And people who have done their own thing and stayed true to that thing, they're doing great. And people who have followed it, it doesn't quite stick to the wall, just like with all things in life. But what I found is that in this country, what we're terrible at is understanding context as well as content. We're really bad at understanding method and mode. Because like Jeff's work, people will listen to it and think, oh, that's interesting, or that's funny, or I don't quite get that. Or, I mean, I think he told me once that people said, you know, someone said to him that he was a funny poet, and that you know, wasn't. And I thought, yeah, that's a complete reduction, because the person's intimidated by the sophisticated context with a message which is not desperately trying to sound lofty or emotionally insightful. It's going way beyond that because of a confidence and an ownership of a kind of authentic British English language, which you have too. And I suppose what I started to realize was that language, you know, which all is fundamentally what poetry is about, is understanding one's own use and experience of language in the world, for me would always be British. Well, actually English, very English. And I've been accused of being very English everywhere apart from England, of course.
Yeah.
I do get to go into a lot of spaces, which again, it's an enormous privilege. I've worked really hard to do it. Where we did a reading in Krakow together, or you know, I've done a lot of these festivals where when you're reading in Argentina with Leonce, people will say, oh, you speak English very nicely. You're very English. You're very English. And so it's actually, the more I've traveled and the more I've tried to pick up techniques from different places, and the same at writing, I definitely picked up from outside of the UK.
Yeah, I was going to say
continental, continental energy and practice. The more I do that, the more I realize that the value in my own work is stealing modes and methods which aren't English, you know, that aren't quintessentially English, which are ubiquitous. They are the earth's, and then turning it to something which might engage with a kind of Englishness or a pathos, or, you know, my Guide to Being Bear-Aware book with Shearsman is full of references to the British Empire, and I'll get like one email every like year being like, I like your British Empire poem, and it makes me feel most proud. So it's a good question, because I think the more you travel, also I have to say that is a very English thing, to travel, to be restless, to go beyond England for lots of things, you know, historically, without touching on that, cuisine, blah, 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 you know, empire. It's a very English thing to travel, to take in global influences and then make it something different in an English kind of way. So I feel very English, and I feel very not American. None of my influence is American. I barely read any American poetry. It just hasn't yet struck me, which might be super ignorant. But if I'm anything, it's English European. You know, European poetry is the biggest influence me. I don't read a lot of British poetry. That's why I don't criticize any mainstream English poetry, because I don't read any.
Yeah.
When I've picked it up in Waterstones, it has not done it for me. So I'm always looking to Europe, and this is the great advantage of running the European Poetry Festival and traveling. I'm getting sent work in translation, or visual work, or performance work, or live work every week in my email, and I'm stealing from people all over the world as well. With 3 a.m. magazine, which I edit, I get 20 submissions a day from all over the planet. So in a weird way, I don't know what's happening in England now. And I do know that the more English people are, the less it seems to resonate with English people in a modal way. So yeah, I've thought about that a lot. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, and I think a lot about this too, about how Englishness is sort of been hijacked really at the moment. You know, the whole sort of, and Brexit, Farage, which of course we've devoted some time to, Nigel. and how that sort of whole idea of Britain has been hijacked really and made into something quite toxic. And for me, it's almost sort of like, well, not repudiating it, not even actively trying to reclaim it, just letting the Britishness through references, the Englishness, as you say, through references and through phraseology and language, just letting it sit there, you know. And it's not sort of like a great mission for me, but I sort of think it's you shouldn't repudiate your own culture because some unpleasant people are doing unpleasant things with it. In fact, definitely. It's more important not to do that, you know.
Yeah, because that's kind of a psychological defense in and of itself, right? To be ashamed.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think I've tried to stay away from the ends of the debate. I've tried to not be involved in anything which simplifies things. Like a lot, Farage and that whole movement, it's just about simplification for propaganda, right? And I don't want to know. I don't want to know about any of the discussions which reduce any culture on this earth to one idea or one feeling, because my whole purpose for myself as a poet is to do the opposite. I want my poems to be more complex than reality, not less. So I'm not interested in anyone who's, I mean, I have to say people do that from every direction. So
yeah, it's true.
But yeah, it's a parody of certain things. In fact, I don't even know what it all means, right? I mean, I think none of us know what it means to have a national identity, and a lot of the times when people set themselves out the task to explore that, they're doing the precise opposite. And yet then other times you come across someone's work, like I can think of people in the last few years who I've had the pleasure to work with, like someone like Vic Shirley, whose work I discovered last year. And
yeah, Vic's great. I've been talking to Vic quite a lot recently, mainly about you.
Oh, well, that's very nice. Hopefully all bad, but just brilliant. You know, just you can just see straight away that someone, and you know, I don't know if Vic is a Bristolian, but she certainly has lived there for a long time, and you can feel it. You can feel the place, and I suppose that's what I'm trying to say is like there are magical things in our language, in our culture. There are magic. I've always said this to people, especially when I'm in a place like France, or I can remember a time in like Denmark where the only thing anyone asked me in Copenhagen is, how do you like Copenhagen? You know, that people are really self-aware all over the world. English people tend to be a little bit confused and muddled. The normal English people, I don't mean like bourgeois poetry academics. And I think our greatest strength is our understatement and our knobbiness, the Partridgian, where people will get cancer or it'll be raining and they'll say the same thing. Yeah, it's a bit of a miserable day, isn't it? Oh, yeah. Well, I love that. It turns me on. Why is that not in poetry more? You know, it's in your poetry.
Exactly. Yeah. I've often thought, you know, sometimes I go and watch like non-league football. I watch old play, you know, and it'll be grim football. It'll be raining. There'll be a wheelie bin in front of me. And I think this is great.
It's where you belong, yeah.
It is. I do feel that, you know.
Yeah.
More than when I go to the Etihad and I watch Manchester City and all this fantastic. I remember going to watch like at Manchester City versus Napoli and thinking, I've never seen football played like this in my life. It's the most amazing thing I've seen. But then sort of, no, I'd rather be sitting next to a bin.
Yeah.
Some non-league, really.
Oh, I love it. I mean, charity shops, like when I go to other countries, they don't have charity shops. And I'm like,
really?
Where'd you get your books? Where'd you get your clothes? Where do you get your conversation? Like, I think that is it, you know, and I can really feel it with students, because you meet students who are like 18, 19, and if they're from Swindon and they're just like, I like writing, oh, they're amazing. It's just the gem. There's a certain kind of energy and unpretentiousness. And what happens a lot in poetry, I think, is that it gets battered out of people and they have to be slick and they have to, you know, create the right, and they lose the thing which actually makes them, I mean, that if I have a motivation in teaching and publishing stuff, it's to do what people have done for me permissively. You know, if you want to write a book of crayon poems,
yeah,
it's a very un-English thing to do. It looks like some sort of French gesture, you know. I use the crayon, I am gesturing about like, you know, no, Crayolas are good and I'm interested in them. They smell nice. I was in my studio doing pictures. Pentarat Press, lovely people. They publish them. That's it. There's no big gesture. It's just that's possible. And I think that has been fenced off with a kind of Englishness. And I think that has to do with class. I don't want to really talk about that because I find any kind of stuff like that kind of boring. But I do think it has to do with class. You know, you meet people who've touched on any working class or lower middle class environments. That's the material of life. Whereas you go middle bourgeois, then it tends to be more, you know, we're thinking about whatever, streams and stuff.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always the whole world is just littered with things you can just pick up and put together. And sometimes that's all you need to do. So I was in Farm Foods the other day and I saw the, tiger baton pizza. You need, you know what I mean? It's already written for you in a tiger crust.
Yeah.
What a beautiful world it is. You know, you don't need
people
to go
don't even mean it.
Yeah.
People don't even mean it. I saw yesterday, I was walking through the city of London and I went into an alcove and there was a full chocolate gatto on the floor that had been stamped into the pavement and there was loads of plastic spoons around it. And I was just like, who stamps on a gatto during a lockdown? I mean, I've said the phrase many times. People say that my poetry is weird. Just open your eyes, you know. That stuff is magic. And I've often said when my students are like, oh, I don't want to use found text or make silly sounds, you know, I'm like, that's fine. I'm not arguing it's all poetry. I have an increased appreciation for mainstream and classical poetry recently. I've been reading, not present day because there's jealousy, but, you know, stuff from like the 70s, 80s and 90s, you know, I've been reading stuff, you know, Tom Gunn and stuff like that. And I know that's not mainstream, but you know what I mean? And I like it. I think it's great, but there has been no real recognized, you know, what I don't know how we define recognized. Do we say a stupid Guardian review or whatever, an award? Maybe not, but there's not a lot of recognition for the idea that stuff, the Tiger Baton pizza, is the proper material of serious work. And it is. It's not funny. That's actually language doing what poetry stuff, you know. And I think that's why I've ended up doing books of scribbles and crayons and loads of sound work. That's serious stuff. It just doesn't have to look like it's serious. It doesn't need to have the clothes of seriousness. It's the most important stuff to me. It's actually the material of poetry, and it is genuinely fenced off. It's weird. I don't know if it struck you as weird.
Yeah, it's just like, why wouldn't you? You know, why would you cut yourself off from it, from the weirdness of the ephemera and the bits and bobs and the bits and pieces and the flotsam and jetsam of the world? Why would you cut yourself off from that? And I feel like poetry does still. I don't think, you know, things sort of get better over time, but there's still something like the conception that my children get at school of literature. It's still very much that it's about, you know, quote Wordsworth, strong emotion recollected in tranquility, which it can be, you know, but that's not all it is. It's not always about saying this happened to me and this is the way it made me felt, and now I want you to feel the same way. It can be just saying, here you go, here's a plastic bag full of stuff. You know what I mean? Just sort of have a look through that.
Yeah, I nearly drowned in a jacuzzi reading Wordsworth. I'm with you. Yeah, I think it's weird that I mean, in the past, I would have said in the defense of the people doing that I would have said that stuff is bad poetry. I've read many observational, emotional poem where I've just thought, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Are you telling me what to feel about something when you're not the person to be telling? It surprises me more people aren't worried about that, telling other people what to feel or think. But now, I don't know, I'm a bit more aflow, and I agree with exactly what you said. I think it's a spectrum, and it's about understanding material and method. I mean, that's the new phase of my work. I think the last 3 years with Poem Brew, this project I started, it's about actually, should we talk about method? You know, you shouldn't just choose what you're going to write about. You should choose how you're going to write it.
Yeah,
that should be the first thing that's said to a student. You shouldn't be telling a student or a young person interested in poetry what to write about. Of course, I don't think people do that, but you shouldn't say this is an important thing to write about. But you should be giving them options for ways to write it. And I think the fact that there is that is definitely not the case here.
No.
It is a big thing, because it isn't the case in other countries. It is absolutely the case. If you're an 18-year-old Austrian poet, you know that you could write, depending on your own authentic, bizarre interests, visual poetry, sound poetry, performance poetry, video poetry, traditional lyrical poetry, all that. It's all there for them in the main bit. So there has to be something to do with our culture or with our specific tradition.
Yeah, I mean, very simply, I was talking to the MA students at Edge Hill recently. Like sometimes maybe, go back and talk to them a little bit. So there's a few of us doing that. And I did exactly that. I thought, I'm just going to go and I'm going to show them some of the stuff I've done and say, if you're interested, you can do this. And this is how you do it. Because nobody ever said that to me. Nobody ever said, you can make a poem just by getting existing text and recombining it. You can make a poem by copying text. You can make a poem by putting the Bible through a spreadsheet. This is what I did, and it's not even that you want people to do it. And I also think your hit rate's going to be quite small. There might be, as it turned out with the thing at Edge Hill, there's one person that sort of says, well, yeah, I want to do that. And you think, well, that's what it's all about. Because nobody ever showed me these things. I went through an MA in this country, and I found lots of things sort of by accident. And I think, somebody could have told me those things earlier on, and it would have been quite a different experience for me. So going back to sort of what we were talking about and community and things like that, sometimes I just sort of think you can give people shortcuts, can't you? You can show people you can show people where you've got to and show them a quicker way. So you can sort of say, well, have you thought of just not even thinking about words?
100%. Yeah. I mean, in a way, to play devil's advocate on myself, I've said this before, rather than moaning about it, sometimes I am really grateful, because it's given me a purpose in a way to discover things and to learn from people like yourself and to find the people who might give me the permission. Because I think the thing is, you can't, I mean, this is another thing I'm sure you found teaching, you can't make people curious, and nor should you. I mean, I don't want to go off on another rant, but this whole idea that people should read poetry, that is good for them, is amazing to me.
Like cod liver oil.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the idea that most people would benefit from poetry is insane, and it's because of this positive aesthetics thing that we can't have poetry that makes you worse. You definitely can, but I think what the situation in England, I've realized in other countries when I've traveled, again, a huge advantage of that privilege is I'm also quite lucky to have something to share. I'm also quite lucky to be able to say, have you heard of Asamic poetry? Because people hadn't. So I think that's quite amazing, because you feel like, to a certain extent, you're done. But I happen to come along when the internet's there, travel is easier. There's a lot of people sharing a lot of stuff from the past 100 years plus. And so I feel sometimes actually that I've been so lucky. Like I've got the best of all worlds. In a way, I have like a career and I have a lot of friends and a lot of goodwill. And then at the same time, I have a feeling like, wait a minute, I'm doing some stuff here which is new, or at least new for England, a little bit. So sometimes that the permission, I think, which I had from you and from the people at the Writers Forum when I started, and people like Scott, was not so much the specific, oh, you can do sound. It was more like, you can question what it actually is and what you can actually do with it. And I bet they did that with a lot of people, but some of us are then like, all right, this is my journey now. In my time and place, I'm doing this. I'm interested in this. This is where I'm going. I'm restless. I don't want to just do. I think my least two popular books, in a way, are the books I did in 2017 and 2018, Guide to Being Better Aware and The Wrestlers, which are formal, like Pablo Neruda, Mayakovsky-esque. No one was interested. And it's then I was realized, it's not really what you write a lot of the time, it's where you are, it's what you're writing about, it's about how people get to know you. So you might as well go on these discoveries where you're collaborating with people to learn, where you're interested in new ideas. because that's just like a universal thing. It doesn't matter what country you're in. If you like that, you're probably going to end up quite satisfied.
Yeah, I mean, comedy's a big thing for me. I think it's sort of, we've talked about this before, the crossover.
Yeah.
Not like comedy, but anti-comedy, and that sort of the poetics of uncomfortableness and discomfort that you get, I think, was sort of certainly the comedy that I'm interested in. I'm also very interested in bringing that into poetry. And I know and certainly in terms of performance, you're very interested in drawing from that as a different stream.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, again, I've learned it from you. I think we've done 7 performances together where I'm always competitive, trying to be funnier than you in the awkwardness and always failing. I think the Danny Dyer one, I ate out on that for a long time.
That's because I didn't want to say the really bad swear words in Manchester. That's what it was.
Yeah, whatever.
You were straight in there.
Whatever your excuses, but yeah, I think that is real for me. A lot of the performance I do is fish in a barrel, which I feel bad because the expectation of a poetry reading is so fixed that if I get up and just do a dance, people are freaked out. So I think a lot of the time I turn my game up at my own events. I wouldn't read at my own events for the first 2 years for fear of the ego thing, that gig person who puts themselves last. But then after a couple of years, I got into the idea that, wait a minute, everyone knows I'm going to do something strange or awkward here. So I really have to evolve my work and I have to get it really skilled. And so that benefited me so much when I would go and do like some strange gig in a different country or in a different place and no one knew me. I was so used to people thinking, oh, what's Tom and Steve going to do? I mean, we've got that. If we perform again next year, if we don't fall out horrifically, then I wonder, people know exactly what to expect, and we're kind of in this certain space. But I think in general, that's what really frustrates me sometimes when I look at how successful some people are in comedy, in film, in dance, in music, and all these other art forms by being just a little bit dissonant, by having negative aesthetics. And then in poetry, it's just not a squeak for anything doing that kind of work. So that's when I do get a little bit jealous and a little bit funny. But in general, yeah, I agree with you. I think that the reading is like one of the most exciting evolutions in British poetry for people like you and me and this side of it, because there's a whole, I don't know how you conceive of your live poetry work, but for me, I stole a lot from Europe and I stole a lot from people like yourself. It's like, I think it's a new thing. I've taught it, call it, performance literature. It's like something like theatre, something like, performance art, but it's poetry. I don't know how you feel about what you're doing with it.
Yeah, well, I've done a lot of stuff recently. I've been like, diagrams and stuff like that, and customer reviews and things. So that I was in this tribute to Pete Shelley and Buzzcocks, and Pete Shelley died a couple of years ago. And I wrote a very, very short piece for that. And I've been on a couple of events where I've done that. And it's called In a Different Kitchen, which is what track Buzzcocks album. And so it lists a load of kitchen equipment. And when I've been performing it, I've been getting like diagrams of oven housing, things like that. And I've got more. Initially, it was just because I had a 5-minute slot. And I thought, this is going to take me 30 seconds, because it's 100 words, 100 something words, and 160 words. I'm going to need something else to fill. I don't want to read anything else. And so I got into this whole sort of thing, like I'd have bits of paper, I'd be dropping stuff, I'd be knocking stuff over. I'd be holding stuff up, and sort of saying, here's this is this, there, look at this there. This one gets 4 stars, a door on this fridge freezer sticks a bit, and I thought I could almost just like dispense with the poem. I could just do
I've definitely got to that point. Yeah. I don't bring poems anymore. Yeah, the last couple of years I've been doing almost purely improvised. I mean, our collaborations have been hugely improvised. A lot of the best moments came from pure accidents in the work we've done. But I've told this story, and this is too much of a love fest because I keep complimenting you, and obviously I hate you, but I've told this story about watching that reading that we did together in Edinburgh. Do you remember? They were drunk and heckling you. and it was a 10-minute slot, and I was getting wound up because you know what I'm like, and I thought, you know what, if they, in fact, I did hurt some people's feelings that night, but let's not talk about that. And you just kept going. I've told this story because I've talked about early influences on my reading. I watched Jeff Hilson and Tim Atkins a lot. I watched Holly Hester a lot. I watched Emerson and Lucy Harvest Clark, and I've told these stories then. And I remember Ross Sutherland when we were doing a gig together in Shetland, and there was, I think, 4 people, and I was like, you know what? I'm so tired. We got the ferry overnight. And Ross was like, what are you on about? It's 4 people. And I remember thinking, like, Jesus, that's a huge lesson. Like, his professionalism was just extraordinary.
Yeah.
At the same time, I was watching you in Edinburgh where you stood up and they were talking over you. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, yeah.
We're not listening. And they were talking over you and they were kind of heckling, and I was getting really wound up, and you just kept going. And I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the audience started to go completely quiet. Then they started to listen. And by the end, they were like roaring with cheers when you finished. And I remember thinking, Jesus Christ, I need to learn. How is that working? Because you're patient and you know, and you considered the reading as a live artwork. You were doing a piece of work. You weren't just reading from a piece of paper. So I think that, I've had a lot of influences from people I've watched very carefully. It's another advantage of organizing events as well. I get to watch a lot of people read.
That was a strange day, that one. I was just talking about this recently. I'd come to Edinburgh and sort of around about lunchtime. I think we were reading in the evening. And I'd walked up to where I was staying in Leith, and I'd seen a man in full Highland dress eating up a glass bus shelter. So that was the way that day was going, you know.
It was a bit like that. Yeah, it was. I don't think I'd ever been heckled before. And I think that my feeling was just a bit like, I don't know, you know, I need to calm down. So I was glad to be there with you because you are very calm. I don't like being heckled. I don't think if it's comedy, that's cool. But if it's not, then it's not. And really just watching you, I calm down and I learn a huge amount.
Oh, thank you. Well,
no, it's true.
I remember just sort of just doggedly trying to keep going.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what I knew you'd say. You'd say, I think I said to you afterwards, mate, that was an amazing reading. You just went, what else was I going to do? Just have to keep reading.
That's something I'd say.
But this is funny about this conversation, which is so nice, is there's been so many good readings and poets all over the UK that people don't know exist. There isn't like a history of stuff like that, you know, because that was 2 years after I started writing. And it is a bit of a shame that there isn't like this kind of like, that's one of the things that is the downside of the work not being super recognized, is that there isn't people going around and going, because when I started and I heard that there was like all these readings with Bob Cobbing and Phil Minton and all the Gamelan Orchestra and all these collaborations, and there's no documentation of it and there's no discussion of it until it's completely safe. A lot is lost, you know. So speaking to you now about that, having never really thought about that reading 8 years ago, and obviously now we're in lockdown where we can't do these things, we can't have adventures. It's one of the parts of the culture of being a poet, which is so great in England. It just makes me realize there's so much that's just completely lost. Maybe that's good. I mean, who cares? But it is still part of what.
Yeah, I suppose it's not really. I mean, if it has an impact on people as it has on us, then it isn't really lost, is it? I mean, it's sort of. Yeah. I have these sort of moments. I don't know. Very occasionally, where you sort of think it's like a shift in your mind. You sort of think you suddenly realize what you're doing. I think maybe that reading you're talking about was one of those. I think a big one that for me was once I was reading in London for an IFPDQ reading with James Davis Press, and Michael Bashinsky was on before me. You know Michael Bashinsky?
I know his name, but I don't know him.
Yeah, well, he's such a great performer, right? And he was rolling around on the floor. He was getting the audience to applaud. And then at the interval, Chris McCabe was there, and he said, "Look, I know you're a genius and everything, but fucking hell, follow that." So I thought, what am I going to do? You know, so. I just got up there and I said, "Oh, Michael's demolished the wall between audience and performer. I'm here to put it back up again." And I thought that's become like, that was like a weird sort of moment, just sort of thinking, I'm going to do something completely different to that, and it's all right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm just going to do the complete opposite, and it's fine. So I don't know whether you've had any sort of moments of revelation like yourself.
I think that that is so connected to what I was saying before about you meet people who know what they're about, and then you meet other people who don't. I mean, I think that's the big thing in life. I mean, not in poetry. It's something I think about a lot. It's just, and that's not a criticism of people who would then try and copy Michael Basinski, because I understand that instinct. But I think that's it. It's just like, you know what you're going to do. And you're like, oh, I feel like I should roll around on the floor too, but I won't. But I'll take the feeling that I should and turn that into an aesthetic, you know. So I think what I've just started to learn is that there's so much power in that kind of gesture. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing. I think the work I was doing live in the first 2 or 3 years was too much. Because I was ashamed, actually, without being too confessional. I felt very embarrassed to read. The first year of my reading, I was being insecure and I was being defensive because I felt like somehow I was ashamed of presenting something creative because it was so different than the world I came from or my background.
Yeah.
I just thought, oh, what would my brother think if I was reading my poem about a boxer? He'd just be like, mate, what's that about? He wouldn't. He'd be super supportive. But in my heart, I felt like I was at school again, like doing a play, and it went wrong. So I overcompensated by tapping into like a physical energy, which is very natural in me. And that was a huge learning experience. It wasn't the right thing to do.
I've seen you do some very performative things. I've seen you here in Manchester. What were you doing behind the screen? Were you pretending to stab yourself? I can't remember. You had a big bear fur on. I've seen you do that. I've seen you wear like a sort of black mask and who was it you carried off? I can't remember. Astra. Off the set. So I've seen you do all sorts of things that are way outside the realm of poetry, I suppose.
I'm a knob. Yeah, I just think that collaboratively it's different. I can feel that freedom and that energy of doing big things or even quite physical things like dancing and moving around and throwing stuff because I've got permission from the other person. And I think the other person's saying to me, listen, this is fine. Because often people have much more training, much more education than me in theatre, in performance. Asta Sigathardotti is exactly like that. And Maya Yanto, all these people I've worked with. But by myself, I was way too physical. And now what I've realized is what you're describing when you're following Basinski is the material of the room is amazing. If I just do the right word at the start or the right gesture or take my coat off right or move right, that now what I'm doing is all about truth. You know, it's like so much of live performance, especially in poetry too, is this kind of false sincerity, right? Where the person introduces their poem longer than the actual poem and tells you the content of the poem. Okay, that's okay. But I can play with that. I can stand up and say, hello, everybody, A, B, and C, and then turn. And people feel satisfied by that. And I think nowadays what I do is I have like a mental regulation of a level. And if I don't like the audience or I'm in a bad mood, I'm like, yeah, all right, they're not going to like me at the end. But if I feel bad for people, then I pull it down and make sure they all laugh at the end. And I think that's because I've done so many performances. I work so hard at that. I was doing all these tours, all these gigs, all these different things. I was sometimes I did 100 performances in 2015 and 16. And I just wanted to learn. I just wanted to know what I could do, how I could control things like a comedian does. And I think I don't mind if poets don't do that, but I think they're missing a trick because it's a great joy. You know, that's what I'm missing now. I don't know if you feel the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot to learn from other disciplines, isn't there? I think, certainly in terms of performance. I was sort of very much of the just read it stage for quite a long time, just have a paper and read it, you know. But now, more and more, I'm not really interested in doing that. And almost I could just not read anything. I just like that sort of feeling of just being in that weird space where you're amongst people, but not really amongst them. You're slightly separated out. You may be like, it's in the venues that we frequent, you might just be standing on a different bit of carpet. You might be a couple of inches up. That's the only separation you've got. But you still have that sort of different dynamic, don't you? And it is, I think going back to the sort of the oven housing poems that I was doing, you know, I did those once here in Manchester, and there was a woman down the front that was cracking up every time I was doing something. And there was a boyfriend next to her who every time she laughed would turn and look at her completely bemused. And I thought, that's the reaction that I want.
That's magical.
Person and complete confusion and hostility from another.
Just like your daily life. Just like your daily life.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to work hard not to try and be likable all the time because that's my nature, And I think humor is a way of just being likable. But so I always think about it. I think it's a good thing if you don't even think about that.
Yeah, I think I'm the opposite. That I have to stop myself being confrontational, and that is boring. I was boring myself. Exactly what you mean, trying to be like upset people for the sake of it, because there's such an absence of negative aesthetics. You don't go to a poetry reading and see someone upset people deliberately for a reason, but you go to a piece of theatre or dance or music, you absolutely will. If you go to death metal or punk, you're going to get someone who doesn't care about how you feel, and that's part of the joy.
Yeah.
So I had to go in the opposite direction, and I think that tension is why our collaborations have been quite, people seem to like them, because there's this kind of like faux hostility which we put on a little bit, and then I'm like, look a little bit like, as you've called me, a metro a cosmopolitan dweeb or whatever, and you just look like
woke snowflake, I believe.
A snowflake, yeah. And then you look like someone who goes to see minor league football or non-league football standing in a wheelie bin. So I think that is, I know what you mean. I think pulling away from that natural inclination is part of the joy. But I just think it's missing a trick, because live work, just like visual poetry, just like constraint work, it's just feathers in the bow. It's just the joy of like creating things around the art form we all share. I mean, I don't really care if other people do it, because there's loads of people I know who do it. But I think that is me, to go back to your very first question, that I'm not impatient with what I've done, and I don't feel compelled to do any of it. It's a joy. It's a joy to do performance and go on this journey that you've described, and I've been on too, where you're like, you know what? Take a risk. You want to be nervous. I've always been a little bit like switched on when we're performing. After even when we were reading the Proverbs, there's an energy to that. And so the idea, I haven't read a poem. I know the last time I did, it was in the start of 2019, and then before that, it was a long time before that, and I hated it. I have not done a reading in a long time, because I am so bored of myself. I just get so bored of reading something I already know, I've already written and read. I don't think I'll ever do more than a set of readings again.
Yeah, so on that theme, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the more, I suppose, unconventional, like durational performances that you've done, where you've just what was that one you did where you were on stage just for an hour with no?
Oh yeah, in Vilnius,
which I've watched. Where was that? Was it Scandinavia? So I can't remember where it was, but
it was in Vilnius in the Baltic. Yeah.
Okay.
In Lithuania. Yeah, they just gave me an hour, and I said like what to do, and they were like, do what you like. And so I just set myself. I'd started the year before in March 2019 doing these non-plans. I will not plan. And that was the challenge, to see if my nerves would become the meaning. The thing is, I fall back on tricks, and the tricks I started are like asking the audience for food, and then having conversations with different people who bring me biscuits. And in Germany, I did one where I ate the flowers on the stage, and they phoned an ambulance for me because I didn't know that flowers are poisonous to people. And that became like a big thing. And I was like, what are you on about? And I had to make myself sick. And it became this drama that I'd created in the slot. So in Vilnius, a person in the audience had a dog. I just took a Q&A. I forced them to ask me questions in an extended Q&A. I mean, it's probably shite. It's probably rubbish. But to me, it feels like...
No, it's compelling. I've watched that.
I'm sorry for an hour of your life that you've wasted.
No, but it's just interesting that you would put yourself in that situation, because I think for a lot of performers, it's all about controlling the performance space and controlling the performance time and eliminating all chance and all things that could go wrong. Like a more conventional comedian will have a tight 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Just do that and take the bits out that don't work and put in bits that do, until they've got something perfect. But this is like the opposite impulse, because you do have that. You know, you can go somewhere and you can do a tight performance, but you choose not to.
I think that I feel there's a lot of things happening there. Thanks for saying that. The first is that it is actually a moment in time, you know, because I'm getting probably, when I went to Lithuania, they paid for my travel and they probably gave me £100. I'm not going to do that every week. It's a moment in time. So when I look out at the people, I know that I probably have only got 100 or 200 of them left in my life. And I really want them to feel what I feel, which is like, this is special. This is a moment passing. I mean that really sincerely, not in a cheesy way. I'm like, I'm alive. I'm right here in front of you. You don't have to switch off. You don't have to be necessarily afraid, but this is something that is completely live. And then the other thing is back to this idea of the mode is important. It's really important what the context is. If someone gives you a time slot and has the incredible generosity to invite you across to a different country, I just want to do something where I just feel alive, scared. I'm interrogating what poetry is. I'm having conversations. And so I think that it's just a natural evolution to me. And in the same way with comedians, they speak about their unplanned retorts to hecklers being the best moments. You know, if you watch YouTube compilations, those purely improvised moments are entirely fetishized. And I've had one or two purely improvised performances, one in Dublin for Chris Dodlos Macrees, his amazing Phonica series, where they all said to me afterwards, that was great. How long did it take to memorize? And then I was like, I'm onto something now. Now I'm onto something. Because if they think that was memorized, then I need to keep doing this, you know. And I think that's the thing, is that I know that some of my students have started doing that too. And some people at the Camaradas know they can just get up and improvise. And I mean, we're way behind, aren't we, in poetry? We're way behind. So I think that that's just a natural evolution for most live artists. It's just for us, we're kind of doing something so pushing that people aren't necessarily taking hold of it. My YouTube channel, you know, has thousands of videos of this stuff and they don't get a lot of views, just like this conversation probably, but you know what I mean.
Oh, we'll watch it, won't we? Maybe
I'll watch myself, yeah, over and over again. So yeah, I think it's the natural evolution of going from reading a piece of paper in 2010 and feeling like I'm boring myself to in 2020 not having any plan at all. That seems to me the logical progression. I can't imagine reading the same stuff. Like, imagine doing the same poems like 30 years. I know some people have done that, but I can't imagine it.
Yeah, well, that's without being, you know, cynical, bitter, whatever about it. That's one of the advantages of not really being successful in a conventional sense. Is that how must it feel to be Bob Dylan? Do you know what I mean? When you've done, you're still doing stuff, you're still creating stuff, and still people want you to do stuff you did literally 50 years ago. You know,
100%.
So there's all these advantages to sort of things just coming and going, and really, although you do make a living out of it, you know, you could easily, you're not dependent upon it for your lifestyle. Really, you could do other things. You could upscale your teaching. You could do more in that direction. So there's nothing depending upon it. Therefore, you can do what you want. And also, sort of, you know, there's a certain liberation to being like a middle-aged white man, I think, because nobody's interested. Not Lawrence Fox here, but no one's, you know, you're not someone the world really wants to hear about. You know what I mean, or hear from. So then you think, well, I can do whatever I feel like, really, or I can do nothing at all.
Yeah. I think
in that of not having that sort of I find it quite hard to sort of deal with, well, what in our world passes for success, when people sort of say, I really like that thing that you did, just to try not to do that again, you know. Yeah, unless you feel like doing it, because quite often you've moved on. I mean, you've moved on so many times, you know, you've so many different not even phases you do, because they all sort of happen at once with you, you know, but you have sort of done so many different things. And so I wonder how it feels to be somebody who's had, you know, a high level of success, and people just want you to do that thing over again, and you don't want to. It's a sort of
I agree.
Tragedy.
I could not agree more with you. I thought about that a lot. I I have thought about that a lot. Yeah. Not that I thought I would ever be successful, but when I think of other people, and I don't mean this in a selfless way, but we could pick a variety of people who I really admire who haven't necessarily had that success. And I often, I use that to make sure my mind is clear to be free and to be grateful. Because I think, you know what, if this person hasn't had that recognition, then I need to just keep doing what I'm doing because it's never going to come to me. And I think you could not be more right about that, the freedom that that provides. I feel incredibly lucky to have the freedom to do what I want, but to not have too much expectation. I think that is completely correct, because what matters is the creative curiosity, because that must be such a trap for people, even in a world as small as poetry. If they do really well in a certain moment of their writing, to feel like everything they do after is in response to that. Whereas I never feel that. There's nothing I've ever done which I think is brilliant. There's nothing I've ever done which I think was a moment where I should do something else related to it. It's just a series of enjoyable moments. Some were good, some were bad, some needed more of this and that. Who cares? No one cares. I don't care. And that's an incredible freedom, you know, to just stay in it. And I think maybe sometimes I do wonder if I'm moaning because of the English. I mean, I try not to moan, but maybe that is part of it. What is the poetry of moaning? I mean, that excites me as an idea. You know, maybe it's just that's the mode of all professionals, that they always notice what they don't have and don't notice what they do. I've tried really hard not to do that. I feel that from you too. I feel like you like with Zimzilla, I feel like you're really like taking a moment to be like, no, I don't necessarily need anything more than I've got. This is fine. You know, I feel that from a lot of people who I admire, a sense of self-discipline, to be like, no, I know what I'm about and I know what I want to do. And this is part of what I want to do. I mean, how do you feel about the press and what you've done? Because we organized an exhibition celebrating your press.
How long ago was that now? 6 years. Oh. God.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
When did you start it?
2009. Almost.
Oh, wow.
To almost this time of year, very end of 2009, when I just did a PDF with Tina Darrow. But then it's obviously gone a long way since then and changed a lot since then. So this next object that's coming out will be 60. There'll be 60 of them.
Wow. Do you think you take a break?
Yeah, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have something to mark. So you be invited to be part of this. I'm planning next year to have a Zimzala 60 online, probably an online event where absolutely everybody who has ever been involved will have 15 minutes. So it might last all day, but just to come and do something, no matter what. It doesn't have to be anything to do with the press. And just sort of, yeah, it has been. I do feel I need to step away from it a bit and recharge and refocus, I think.
Yeah.
Just because things are very hard to do. You know, there doesn't seem to be a way to eliminate the time. Like with the Philip Terry object that's just came out last month, about a month before. The way that I arrived at making them is still quite time consuming. These sort of Oulipian text objects. There's a little cog that turns around. There's a flip book. There's a miniature book. And it takes me about 20 minutes to make each one. But it took me months doing the wrong thing, doing things the wrong size, of doing work before I got to that stage where I could make one in 20 minutes. And even that 20 minutes is still quite heavy going because it's, you know, I made 50 of them.
Jesus.
So so no matter how long I've done things, I never seem to arrive at a point where I can miss out that experimental stage. I realise now that I probably don't want to miss out that experimental stage. Doing things wrong and arriving at the final form is all part of it. And then sometimes I overcommit and I don't remember that that's what always happens, and I end up with too much to do. So I think what I'd like to do is clear what I've got now, and then take on these projects and do them slowly, and not be doing them under pressure. So that's sort of the future, I think. I don't think I'll stop completely, but I'll take a bit of a break. So Sophie Herxheimer's object will be coming out in 2021. That'll be all that comes out in 2021, I think. But maybe 2022 I'll be back.
it can be a thankless task. I think it's incredible that you've got to 60. I mean, some of the works, because of the specific nature of Zimzilla being about avant objects or sculpture poetry, really, you've obviously because there's this project with Astra Papakristodulu now, right? Poem Atlas and
Poem
Melon
Atlas
Press, Salim Reed. They followed what you've done basically for the past 11 years. This engagement with physicality and the book as a thing. It's quite. I think I have a huge amount of respect for people who are in poetry, publishing, in the kind of poetry we're involved in. Obviously, a lot of my relationships with people doing that are really, really positive because I have an immense amount of respect for people who are doing that work to support other people and share it. That's the lifeblood. Without that, no internet, no live stuff would take its place. So I'm sure I speak on behalf of a lot of people to say thank you for putting all the work in for doing that, because some of the stuff you've done, like Kimberly Campanello's incredible volume, Mother Baby Home, it's really just wouldn't exist without you doing it. It's not like there's an alternative to what Zimzilla is doing. There is no alternative. You're the only one doing it.
Well, that was a privilege to do. I mean, it's a privilege to do them all, but there's this sort of importance of that book, the ongoing importance of it. It's a real privilege to be the publisher of it. You know, we put that in for every single prize going. Really? Yeah.
Oh my God, but how is that possible? Because you have to send 5 copies or something.
Well, we sort of found ways around it. I mean, Kimberly was driving this. It was, you know, she was very keen. She found these opportunities. So we tried sort of Irish prizes, Canadian prizes. Sometimes they'd let us send a PDF. And you sort of think, this is such an important, regardless of me being the publisher of it. And it just got nothing at all, you know. You sort of think, but in some ways that's a validation, because you sort of think, well, you know, still got it as a press. Yeah. You know what I mean? You're still not stuff that people think, most people think that's not what poetry is. And I suppose that's ultimately what the ethos is of the press, is to bring these things. I mean, the most successful things, I think you alluded to, for me, are things you think, well, this would not exist had I not done it. You know?
Definitely. Yeah, that's what I think about the majority of your list. I watched Kim perform from that book in Munich for a project we were doing this March. Literally ended as the lockdown came in, and it's one of those things, like I was saying before, if that's not getting, you know, attention, then we've got no chance. So we might as well just do whatever we want to do, because it's just an extraordinary work. And Kim is a brilliant poet and a human being too, and should be completely lauded. I mean, there's only so many spots that go around, but that work is special. So yeah, if you hadn't have done that, it wouldn't exist. And I think that about a great majority of what you've done, you know, and you've supported a lot of the most interesting people doing the most interesting work in their repertoire, I think. So yeah, I'm glad you've done it, although I know it must have been a lot of work.
Yeah, well, I think it's I'll be back. Sort of no, I think almost like stock taking sort of think, just sort of have a bit of a pause and then.
Yeah. Well, you did an amazing job with this as well. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, well, that will be on sale very soon. I mean, it is on. I mean, the physical books will be here soon. They're on their way.
Yeah. Are you happy with it, the way it came out?
That's good. Yeah, I've got the rubbishy Lulu version here. You see how bent that is. See how warped it is.
Have you seen?
Look at this weird random barcode at the back.
The picture there from the
book. Bun shot.
That's a picture of my posterior, which obviously was a highlight of the book. Yeah, you did such a good job, man. It's rendered so beautifully.
They look good, don't they? They do look good.
No, I'm so happy with it. It's a really beautiful volume.
Steve, I'm worried my computer is going to run out of space and we're going to lose this recording.
Yeah. Let's stop now.
Yeah, because I'm a bit concerned because this hard drive isn't that big. So I'm going to stop recording. Thank you very much for taking
a pleasure.
A busy schedule.
I was happy that we didn't actually talk about the book. And that's perfect. That is like the dream of a podcast. That was kind of my goal, to never really talk about the book. But please, if you're watching this, you know, drive safe.